of our Global Market Outlook launch conference. Yeah, that were exciting 3 days coming to an end. We have the last session. It's one of my favorite ones, obviously, being a European myself. So we will talk about solar in Europe for the next hour. And I'm really excited to have with me 4 of the leading European associations dealing with solar, lobbying for solar in Europe. And I'm having with me José Donoso, who is the CEO of the Spanish Association, UNEF. I have with me Amelie Venstra, who's the Policy Director of Holland Solar. I have with me Artem Seminishin, Association ASEU, and I have with me an old colleague from SolarPower Europe and now the CEO of SER, the French Renewables Association, which is also supporting solar very strongly. Okay, let's me give a quick intro. So what do we see? So we launched the, yeah, that's me, by the way. I'm Michael Schmela, the Executive Advisor of SolarPower Europe, and and I was responsible for the Global Market Outlook at the association. So just a short overview. Next slide, Ariana. So if you look at that slide, this is from our Global Market Outlook. You see the top 10 markets of the world, so who were the largest installers last year. And very nice thing is that 2 of the countries that are today represented on our panel are on this slide, and one is Spain, which was last year Europe's largest market, and the other one, which is probably to many much more of the surprise, is Ukraine. Actually, Holland was also there the year before, and the market increased quite a bit, but still this year you needed over 3 gigawatts to be among the top 10. France hasn't been there yet, but the pipeline is huge, and Alex will tell us when we can expect France to show up as well. Next slide, please. So what you can see here is a breakdown of the regional shares worldwide for the different regions. And the nice thing is, if you look at the last bar on the right, you see actually after quite a while that Europe picked up speed again. So in Europe, installations almost doubled or more than doubled last year. And that's also reflected in the annual shares. So Europe could see here, we are still behind China, and if you would take Asia as a whole, and even more. But nevertheless, I think we are now actually at 20%, which is really very nice, and even left America behind, at least on an annual basis. On a cumulative basis, that looks different. So if we look at it for the future, next slide, please. Then you see that's from our overview for the next 5 years. You see this dip that we had or that we are seeing for 2020, which will be in particularly strong for Europe. So we anticipate the market to go down from around 22 gigawatt in 2019 to around 16 in 2020. But we anticipate the market to come back, and that's also when we grow shares again in Europe. What we are doing now, we have short presentations from the 4 panelists, and this will be basically the start of this discussion, which will follow. So we will probably have maybe 20 minutes for the presentations, and afterwards we will discuss the markets. I would like to have our first presenter start, and that's José Donoso, representing the largest market of Europe, Spain. José, it's a pleasure. The floor is yours. José?
Hello?
Yeah. Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
You let just Ariana please know the slide, and yeah, she will continue.
Sorry, Sorry, Michael. I hear that you can hear me well to me. The people can hear me well to me. Then I will.
Say you don't have to do anything. Stay as you are. Actually, Ariana will. Move the slides. Okay, maybe let's, because I think we're a little bit time constrained, so why don't we with Amelie. Amelie, will you jump in? Thanks.
Do you hear me?
Yes, perfect, loud and clear.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Amelie Veenstra. I'm working at Holland Solar, the association of the Dutch solar industries, and it's a very exciting time, of course. So I'm happy to tell you about how things work in the Dutch market. Next slide, please. Okay, I will tell you a little about the key sector developments. And I have a lot to talk about, so I hope I can stick to the most important developments right now. On your left, you see, it's a little bit puzzling, I see, but in your left, you see the total capacity of solar PV of specific market segments. So you see the orange bars are the residential sector. So it has been growing very rapidly last years, thanks to the net metering in the Netherlands. And you also see a very good growth of commercial buildings. This was thanks to our feed-in subsidy scheme. And of course, there's no lack of finance options in the Netherlands. And a new phenomenon in the Netherlands are the ground-mounted utility-scale parks. So what you see in the Netherlands is there's a growing market in all segments, and also, of course, a growing debate in the Netherlands about whether we want these ground-mounted parks or not. So we actually suffer from that debate in the practice. And this will not stop in the near time. So this is a very important thing in the Netherlands. And another important thing, of course, is the growing grid issues. The DSOs and the TSOs did not see this growth coming, so they are behind with building new capacity. And there is also, all the connection requests are actually piling up. So this is also hampering the development of solar PV right now. And of course, there's a high learning curve in our sector and the DSO sector to deal with these problems. So the times are very interesting. Also, there's an increase of quality requirements because insurance companies and tender authorities say there were too many fire incidents. So this is also very important and hampering of also because insurance companies say we will not insure these type of installations on these type of buildings. So this is also asking a lot of attention. Important new thing in the Netherlands is that we decided this was in the climate agreement, that there will be 30 regional energy strategies, and these regions are clusters of municipalities, and they together have a target of 42 terawatt-hour solar and wind onshore in 2030. This is technique neutral, so the regions, they have to decide themselves how much capacity of solar and wind they want, and how they will develop this capacity. So this is an interesting ball game starting in the Netherlands. We see, for instance, that there is an increase of requirements of multifunctional spatial use, and also nature inclusiveness is really becoming a thing in the Netherlands. So bee-friendly solar parks is the new trend. Another important thing to know is that the 50% local ownership is required. So this means that, you do not have a license to operate in the Netherlands when you want a solar park without local ownership. So you do have to be open and develop propositions, including 50% at least of local ownership. And this is really an interesting thing we are in right now, because we do not really know how this works in practice. A lot of debate on this topic as well. As a solar sector, we decided to develop a code of conduct addressing all these issues. So we hope that this will solve a lot of questions. Next slide, please. In the future, we are very confident that there will be a growth. So annual growth. And what we see is that we expect that the residential sector will stabilize at about 800 megawatts per year. We see that the commercial building will also grow, but not as much as we think there is potential, because, in practice, there are a lot of complex issues to solve to fully use all the roof potential in the Netherlands. But we are really, diving into this, because in the Netherlands, we want the roofs to be the important carrier of solar PV systems. About utility scale, we expect about 1 gigawatt peak per year. And we think that this will be restricted in the future because of this, resistance in our community, in our society towards utility scale projects. All right. I wanted to say that this estimates are based on proven pipelines and proven amounts of grants and permits and finance, etc., and so on. So I think this path is secure. So next slide, please. Well, important challenges and opportunities I already told about, of course, the integration in energy systems. So questions like, do we need storage, congestion management? What is the role of hydrogen and electrification of industries and built environments? How will we design the new market? That will actually be the challenge of the coming future. We see negative energy pricing coming up, especially now with the COVID crisis. And also we need to compete with other CO2 reducing techniques in the subsidy scheme. And this is very, very exciting and worrying, actually, because we do not know if we can compete with all CO2 reducing techniques. So you should be aware, if you want to have a business in the Netherlands, you have to compete with lots of other techniques in the schemes. Well, spatial policies and sentiments towards spatial use of solar PV is also a big challenge for the coming years. So we are worried about access to land and water for solar PV, and there will be a lot of more sometimes confusing and very different types of requirements on nature and landscape implementation or integration, and also the local participation will be a very demanding task to solve. Rooftop developments, we need to speed that up, and that is also, I told you, a very complex thing to solve, because it's not growing as much as we hoped it would. Well, there are some interesting opportunities in the Netherlands. There is a low-hanging grid fruit, so to say. There is a more or less 40% reserve grid capacity in the grid, and this will be coming available for renewables in the next year. So this is very interesting. And also in the Netherlands, we never used actually the tricks of inverters, like reactive power, etc., and so on. So we are working on that too, which is really low-hanging fruit. So this will help the grid, the DSOs, to maintain their grids. And well, some last remarks, like we are working on innovation of multifunctional use, like integration in noise barriers, etc., around the highways, and so etc. and so on. So this is a very interesting development to know about. Rooftop self-consumption, we need to address the value of self-consumption better in our energy system. So we have to solve this, and this is also a very interesting thing to follow if you want to stay in business in the Netherlands. And of course, last remark, you cannot have solar PV without quality requirements in place, and so maybe it sounds a little bit strange, but we were lacking behind with certification schemes and inspection rules. So in the Netherlands, it will be mandatory to be a certified installer, because we did not yet have that requirement in place. So this was a quick overview, and well, concluding remark from me is that we see a very promising future for solar PV in the Netherlands, and but of course also with mature problems. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amelie. That was maybe mute yourself. Okay, yeah, thanks. That was a nice and comprehensive overview on what's going on in a very exciting market in Europe. So let's try again with Spain. Jose, maybe if there's quality issues, you might actually simply keep the camera switched off. So just in case.
No, we can.
Okay, then.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Apologize. In 4 months of COVID era, is the first time I have connection problems. I hope that will not be more. But I can switch off the camera if you prefer, and I can speak with the slides only, or I can again to see if we improve the situation. Okay. First slide, please. Is in the Spanish PV market. I don't know if could you put the okay. We came from the year 2019 was a record year. We installed 4,200 megawatts. Practically, we duplicated the installed capacity of PV in Spain. This is only in utility scale. One of the important aspects of this 4,200 is that close of 600 megawatts were with any kind of no tenders, no subsidies, nothing. Were merchant or PPA projects. That is the first time in our history that we have projects connected directly to the market. And many others were thinking to do the same, not to wait for auctions and go directly with PPAs or merchant. In this moment, in Spain, there are signed more or less 4 gigawatts of projects with PPA. But the most of these PPA are signed, the 90% of these PPA were signed with retailers, not corporate PPAs. Only very small, very few projects achieved to sign contracts with corporates. But in any case, in the last year, the image was a very interesting market with one in the line of waiting for auctions, but more or less the same amount of projects not waiting for auctions and wanted to go directly to the market. Next. And in the self-consumption market, the situation was similar. Last year, we installed 459 projects, more or the same. Practically, we duplicated the total amount of megawatts installed in self-consumption until this moment. The important change with the law of October 18 that eliminate all the economical and administrative barriers that the former conservative government installed against self-consumption. Then the image, our forecast this year, before the COVID, was that this year will overpass the new 600 megawatts of new self-consumption installations. Next. But then the COVID arrived. The COVID arrived as was the typical, Taleb can say, black swan, because nobody can to forecast that, but was much more than a swan. It was as a vulture more than a swan, with an important impact in our sector, different impact. There is one impact in a short term for utility scale projects, was the construction delays and permitting delays for the small working of the administration. But this was not very very heavy impact in the utility scale sector, these delays, because in the worst case, they will not be connected at the end of the year, but will be connected in the first month of the next year. That is not so important for statistics. But the heavy impact came from the impact in the electricity prices. The electricity price, you can see in the chart, in the green line, where the electricity price is 19, and in the yellow, you can see the electricity price in 2020 during the months of March and April. You can see a very sharp decline of the prices, practically less. And we can go to the next slide, please. We can see what happened. You can see that the more sharp declines of the electricity price, there is a coincidence with the tops, obviously, of the participation of renewable energies in the market. 70%, 63, 73, 68 of percentage share of renewables in the electricity market. That was interesting, very interesting, because it was asked to do one exercise, one experiment. What will happen in the future with the market when we achieve the targets of our national energy and climate plan? We see here, this is the result. Because in the in our sector, we have one elephant in the room that no one wanted to see. That we want to go to the market, but this market, the rules of this market are not designed for renewables. Because when we participate in this market in a massive way, the prices don't give enough price signal to us to do new investments. Then the reform of the electricity market is a big need for our sector. And this impact, this situation, this picture has an important repercussion in the future projects. To start, the PPA market were declined. The most of in the project signed the last year, the prices signed moved between 38–42 euros. But after to see that the prices of the electricity market decline to 20 or even less, nobody wanted to sign more PPA contracts and in around 40 euros. They wanted under 30. And more important, nobody wanted to sign long-term contracts. They wanted to sign only, particularly corporates, wanted to sign only contracts for 3–5 years. What does it mean? That there is not enough signal for price signal enough to go to the banks to obtain finance for the projects with a PPA. And at the same time, this picture of the market have an important repercussion in the financial institutions. The banks now are more reluctant to finance merchant projects and in worse condition. The bank continue signing financing projects. They put worse conditions, more expensive financial cost and less possibility of finance. We'll see what happens if now when the demand in the future, when the demand will be recovered, if the banks will change again, if the PPAs change again, because this will be a picture that in the real markets will be appear only in several years, not in the short term. But for the moment, this is an important impact. From our side, that we are asking for the government to avoid that a reduction of the installed capacity for new projects to continue in the average of a market of 3–4 gigawatts every year. Two kind of measures particularly. One, options to organize as soon as possible. It is possible in the third quarter of this year to organize the first auction. And second, to work with the permitting. We present to the government a proposal to reduce the half of the time, the permitting time in Spain, the way to allow us to introduce capacity as soon as possible, in a way that will help to the country to, in this situation of the economical crisis, produce with a demand shock. This is the situation for utility scale. Very neglected, very impact in the short term, but maybe an important impact in the medium-long term. For the self-consumption market, the situation is fully opposite. We have an important impact in the short term. The most of our projects are 75% of our projects are in small and medium enterprises because our system is a free market system. We have no subsidies, no more economical barriers, no more some tax, but we have not any kind of subsidies or net metering. Then where is more attractive is in small and medium enterprise and service sector. That are the sectors that have been more impacted by the crisis. Then for many projects have been delayed, and even some are cancelled. But we are more optimistic in self-consumption. We consider that this year the impact could be important, but in the same way that the economy will be recovered, this project will be recovered. And even now, we are seeing that the impact is a little bit inferior that we forecast in the first week of the COVID. In any case, we are asking to plan for help to the sector, to the government, based in fiscal, to improve the fiscal situation for the people that invest in self-consumption project, in the way to allow them to do a fast amortization of the project, to reduce the fixed part of the electricity tariff, the way to do more attractive to invest in energy efficiency and self-consumption, to reduce here in an important way the permitting process for self-consumption project, particularly at municipal level, to organize one public campaign of advertisement in favor of self-consumption, and to organize one specific auction with structural funds for self-consumption innovative projects. We continue to be, as conclusion, we can say that Spain will continue to be an interesting market, probably will continue to be one of the biggest markets of Europe for PV in the next year, because we still have an important political willingness to support us, but will not be so easy as was forecast last year. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jorge. It was very interesting. Can you just go on mute? That would be nice. Thanks. Okay, cool. So then let's continue. Market that, as I already mentioned, probably surprised many in Europe, and that's the Ukraine. Artem, please give us a short overview.
Hello from Kiev. Michael, actually, that surprised us here as well, not only you, what we have done last year. Nevertheless, we have some challenges of this rapid growth, and I will try to highlight all of them during my speech. Please, the first slide. So, as I mentioned, sector had a really rapid growth last year, and we have increased more than 3 times our capacities, solar capacities, compared to 2018. We have added more than 3.5 gigawatt of utility scale. In 2019, that actually was the reason why we entered the top 10 of countries in Europe and even in the world as well. As of 1st of January, total amount in our country is reached 5.5 gigawatt of installed solar PVs, and unfortunately, only 550 megawatt of it is on-grid residential solar PV. That has almost 22,000 facilities, mostly home residential stations. That, according to our legislation, is stations up to 30 kilowatt. I would like to highlight that in Ukraine there are 2 legislation targets that we have here. We have the National Action Plan on Renewable Energy, and by 2020 that was developed in 2014, and unfortunately it was not changed since the time, despite of the huge decrease of the price of solar PV, and it stated the of 11% of renewable energy electricity, the share. Actually, mostly connected to last year's success of solar industry, we have reached this 11%, and if to be more concrete, we have even overachieved goals in solar segment. Another document is Energy Strategy of Ukraine by 2035, and it has a target of 25% of electricity from renewable energy sources. We think that this target is not ambitious enough, and Ukraine could contribute much more to the global and European markets, reducing emissions and developing clean energy as well. Solar power reduced emissions just in 2019 in our country of more than 2,189 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Actually, we have calculated that over the past 2 years, we have in the total amount of 3 billion euro have been invested in the solar power sphere in Ukraine. What system had that such trigger for growth? We have two support systems from the state. First is feed-in tariff that was implemented by the law in 2010 and will last until the end of 2029. This feed-in tariff is diversified according to the installed capacity and according to the installed place of these systems. It is a little bit higher for residential PV, then lower for rooftop PV stations, and the minimum level is for utility scale. Nevertheless, most of installations, as I mentioned before, it's utility scale. Actually, from the 1st of January 2020, we have experienced the reduction of feed-in tariff by 25%, and that will completely change our achievements in 2020. So actually, we have this decrease before the COVID-19 have arrived, and that only more multiplied the effect for the solar power systems and solar power segment. So there is, I would like to notice that currently there is a negotiation between the solar market players and government, and concerning the reduction of feed-in tariff, and the government is proposed to retroactive reduction by 15% for all solar power PV station built before 2020. It is a really important situation because that such a huge growth that we have experienced last year was we were not ready for it. Our grid system is really old, and our capacities, but our capacities have installed generation capacities have installed more than 16 years. So it's quite vice versa. And what we have, that state is really making very hard efforts to compensate the money for the generation facilities, and it makes a very difficult dialogue because unfortunately government offered to stop the development of the sphere even in this year. Actually, since 2019, we have implemented the law that granting auctions support system, but we expected the first pilot action by the end of 2019, and the first original one in the March 2020. Nevertheless, they were not concluded, and also even the quotas were not announced for the auctions. So we have recently discussion with government, and they offer not to start auctions this year. So that's really a pretty situation when the system, solar power system, will not have the options for the support from the state, and now we are trying to minimize this effect on the segment here. Please, can you turn to next slide? So we share that the SolarPower Europe work with our expectations, and we expect that in a low scenario we could add 3 gigawatts for the next 4 years, and if something significantly will change, the medium scenario about around 5 gigawatt. That is connected to the situation when our grid and our system has no energy storage facilities except big hydro, and the balancing is very hard for the system operator. Next. So I was asked to highlight the main challenges and opportunities for the system, but actually there are not 3, there are more. So what we expect that international arbitrages will arrive if the government decided to implement retroactive feed-in tariff changes. And nowadays we see the draft law registered by the government in our parliament that has these retroactive changes. We are aware that government with this draft law wants to stop the support for new solar PV facilities from the 1st of August. And actually this discussion that lasts more than 6 months made really huge uncertainty when, and as I feel here in the association, Solar Energy Association, a lot of investors refused to invest money to the sector, moreover to this uncertainty. Now we have, as for now, we have signed more than 6 gigawatt of pre-PPAs that are has the duration time for 2 years. So this 6 gigawatt for 2 years, but we are not really expecting that even half of them will be ready to build for the next for this year and the next one. And what we lack here is development of energy storage, and it is not still supported by the government. Even we do not have the legislation devoted to this energy storage, and our association is working hard on this topic as well. And what we experience is very huge losses of electricity in the grid. And if we turn to opportunities, so we have really good expectation about residential PV that could accelerate, but the problem is that the cost of capital in Ukraine is mostly the highest in the European region, and if we somehow manage this loans for residential PV, it really could be much more faster growing. And we expect the development of solar PV in commercial sector based only on self-consumption, because the price of electricity in Ukraine is really high for commercial sector, and that makes sense for business to build its own PV stations. Also, we have researched that our country has a huge potential for agrivoltaics and also the potential for rooftop and facade buildings installations. So thank you so much, and I'm sorry that I have exceeded time a little bit, but my intentions were to show you more complex situation at the market as everybody I think is interested in it.
And that was great that you gave us that background. Okay, then let's continue with the fourth presentation of a market that has been a big promise in terms of solar for quite a while. And Alexandre Roche will tell us when France will be able to fulfill that promise. Alex, please.
Thank you, Michael. Very happy to be speaking at the SolarPower Europe GMO launch conference. Hello to everyone. So very briefly, the SER, it's the French Renewable Energy Industry Association, and we're representing all the different renewable energy sectors, but when it comes to solar, similarly to SolarPower Europe, we are representing really the full value chain. I will try to be very brief in order to allow some questions. If you go to the next slide, please. This is an overview of the market development over the last years. You can see that we have reached the symbolic cap of 10 gigawatt in March this year. A market of a bit less than 1 gigawatt in 2019. I must precise here that these figures are also including the deployment in overseas areas where, and this is new, we will have dedicated tenders for the different sub-regions. So basically a market of a bit less than 1 gigawatt in 2019 with a continuation of price decrease. So ranging from 93 euro per megawatt hour for the smaller rooftops down to 55 euro per megawatt hour for the ground-mounted segments. There is one thing also that I want to highlight, because Michael, you were asking to highlight the key development over the last 1 year and a half. When it comes to the smaller segments, you know that we have a threshold of 100 kilowatt peak in order to access the open gate support mechanism. In February, the energy minister announced that this will move up to 300 kilowatt peak, and we really hope that this will boost this market segment. Another key element is that we will have, starting from the 1st January 2021, we'll have an evolution of the local taxation. We have been fighting quite hard for that. So it's the so-called IFER. It's a tax which is based on the production capacity of the plant and not on the production itself. So this will be reduced by half starting from 1st of January next year. So it means that in terms of economics of the project, things will probably improve there. The evolution I also wanted to highlight very briefly is that for us, what the COVID crisis demonstrated is that the renewable energy capacities in the power sector was highly resilient, and we actually during several days already reached our 2030 targets. Renewables altogether made up between 30 and 40% of the production, not the consumption, but the production during March. So it was a kind of real test and a real demonstration that the grid is pretty strong and can absorb very high level of variable capacities. This has been also highlighted by the transmission system operator, even of course if further investments in the grid are needed, but we have a pretty strong system able to absorb much more. If you go to the next slide, I'll come to the main deployment, main evolution of the last year, which is of course the fact that the new multi-annual energy program has been adopted. We have been fighting over the last 2 years to make it as ambitious as possible. So here, what you see on the slides, we are talking about targets, not trends, but these are official targets. This multi-annual energy program is running until 2028. So we have 2 different phases with an intermediate objective for 2023 of 20 gigawatts. So it's basically a doubling of the capacity that we have now. And then for 2028, we have a high range of the target and a low range of the target. But you can see that even if you took a middle a middle target between those two. We are speaking of a target of roughly 40 gigawatts. So in other terms, it means that we have a 30 gigawatt market over the next 8 years. How to reach that? So in this multi-annual energy program, there is also a very clear calendar of tenders. So we'll have for the ground-mounted segments 2 gigawatts, which will be tendered each year between now and 2024. So in 2 different sessions. And then we'll have for the rooftops under tenders. So we'll be talking about the rooftops above 100 kilowatt peak, 3 sessions of 300 megawatt each. So basically, again, another gigawatt in this segment, which are planned in terms of tenders. While we expect for the lower segments around 300 megawatt of project as well. So it means that we will have in front of us a challenge in terms of acceleration, because those targets are expressed in terms of installed capacity. This means that in terms of development for the developers, we really need to hurry up and be able to achieve those targets, which are now enshrined in the legislation. If you go to the next slide, dealing with challenges and opportunities. So as I said, there is a very strong market visibility now for the investors with this calendar of tenders, those targets broken down by segments. We have also and continue to have a very strong R&D component, and you're probably aware of all the different heterojunction technologies that have been developed over the last months. But we also have actors very well positioned on some interesting segments in terms of differentiation. I'm talking about floating PV, for instance, or PV or agri PV. So those are also segments that we hope will develop also strongly. In terms of challenges, one is the land availability, which is probably one of the 2 parameters which is increasing in terms of cost. So two things are increasing. One is the grid costs, and the second one is the cost of land. But around that, there is also a debate about artificialization, because we have a target of zero net artificialization in the country, and there is a debate growing on this topic, where we see that ground-mounted PV is sometimes considered in a similar way than roads or other infrastructures which are clearly leading to artificialization, while of course we argue that this is absolutely not the case for solar. And we're also working on a biodiversity study where we will, I hope we'll be able to show that there is a very strong case also for the ground-mounted segments. Another challenge is the evolution of the support schemes for the larger rooftop installations. I mentioned before that the scheme will evolve, the threshold will move up, but there is also a question of the level of the support for the smaller rooftops in that large rooftop segment. And another one, of course, and I think Jose also mentioned it, it's unfortunately something that we observe in many countries, but in France it's still the case as well. The administrative process is far too long. We have made proposals also to the government to reduce that duration. And finally, I also wanted to highlight that in the current situation, this post-COVID crisis, the political debate has been even much stronger on the industrial component of the deployment of renewables in France. So there we expect a new recovery plan, law actually, which is expected for September. And we are really hoping that some conditions will be put there in order to facilitate the investments in new plants, as well as a current reform of the criteria for the tenders, for the next tenders, where we hope that the CO2 content parameter will be maintained. Those are probably two levers to ensure that potential investments in industry will also develop alongside the market. I think I'll stop here, and of course I'm available for questions.
Okay, great, thanks Alex. That was also very enlightening. Yeah, so what I would like to do, I think we have about half an hour to talk about yeah, what we see in Europe, what the challenges are, and how we can overcome them. Maybe let's go once again back to COVID, because that's having quite an impact. And Jose spent quite a bit of his talk about what Spain is asking for. So if I remember, one of the first panels that we had, there was Mechthild Worsdorfer, the director of the IEA. And it's quite interesting. The IEA is really one entity kind of grown as a fossil fuel association, and but they clearly highlight, and Mechthild also said that COVID is actually, while it is a threat, but it is also an opportunity for renewables, simply because it is probably the right time also when countries think about energy security and also see all these all these impacts that are happening, also decreasing oil prices, decreasing power prices, all these disruptions, while renewables are somewhat stable, they are in the country. So she clearly asked for, I don't know, that the renewables industry should actually now ask for stopping subsidies to fossil fuels at all, and rather redirect that to renewables. So what's the debate? And we're seeing that, of course, also in Brussels. There's a Green Deal, and many of these elements are now also flowing into the recovery stimulus package, especially for renovation, but there are so many other layers and levels. Maybe what's the point here, Alex? You said industrialization is one point. So what else? Are you using COVID actually also as an argument to push for more support from the government?
Well, yeah, we are first trying to deal with the very short-term issue, which is that we are still negotiating delays, because for the developers, of course, the COVID also meant some delays in their project. So there's a very short-term thing, and you probably saw as well that the calendar of the auction this year has been also reorganized. So we'll have a new session in November. So that's for the short term. For the medium to long term, for us, indeed, as you said, the issue is really that the fossil fuels are not exposed to the right carbon pricing. We were happy to see that in the Green Deal, the idea to have own resources for the EU is also based on this kind of an extension of the ETS system first, but also potentially of on the carbon border tax system. We really see that in the current situation, there is no other way to find money than going and exposing fossil fuels to the right carbon price signal. Otherwise, the economics of some projects will probably be harder, and the room for maneuver for the government is also reduced, just simply because of the reduction of fossil fuel consumption. So it's the right time, we think, to also at the national level, and this is what we are asking, to restart this trajectory to increase the tax component of the fiscal system that every fossil fuel is exposed to. But then for the industry component, I think that in the public debate, the need to have maybe shorter value chains in terms of geographic terms, I mean, has also been highlighted. It's hard to say now if that particular element will have a concrete effect on the discussion. As I said, it's mostly about securing investments and favorable conditions for new investments in plants in Europe, basically.
Okay, thanks. Amélie, in Holland, it was interesting, if I recall correct, your slides, you anticipate market growth for this year even for this year in many other countries in Europe that's not taking place. So what is the debate on COVID and solar in Holland?
Yeah, I think the growth in our market is not really affected by COVID, surprisingly enough. So on the short term, there was, within 2 weeks, there was a safety protocol in place for the building and installation sector, allowing the activities to go on. Actually, it didn't really affect the activities of our sector. The problems we do encounter is, of course, the lower electricity prices, because our feed-in tariff scheme does not compensate for a very low electricity price. So this is considered a new type of risk, of course, but this is, of course, in every country the situation. And so actually, and also, of course, also the labor, the accessibility, the availability of labor, installation teams was also a problem, because the installation teams could not travel. So actually, the main concerns we have is that we are afraid that if there will be a recession, there will be, of course, a decrease on demand, and there will be a less availability of finance and lower building activities in the Netherlands. So these are our main concerns. And yeah, well, with respect to the discussion of green recovery, yes, we were already in a transition phase towards more renewables and phasing out coal. This will actually just go on. So that will, of course, we use this crisis to say, yes, you see, we have to maintain green growth. It will bring a lot of new jobs. So this is actually the main argument we say, bring forward, like this will really enforce our economy, because it will bring a lot of new jobs in the future, in the near future. So, and the other discussion about reshoring production of solar panels, that discussion does not take place in the Netherlands yet. So I think we buy from France in the future then.
Okay, let's come back to that in a moment. Artem, regarding COVID, how much of a discussion is that in the Ukraine regarding solar? Also, maybe energy security. I think energy security is probably anyway a hot topic in the Ukraine, but also in terms of economic stimulus, solar has, especially in the downstream sector, it is very job intensive. Are there discussions taking place in the Ukraine?
Yes, you're right. Couple of years ago, when the new implemented to the law system, main argument on the table was the energy security issue. So actually, it was the high point for the development of solar PV and all the renewables. If we come back to this year, this argument actually is not taken into account, and we have to persuade that we need to follow climate targets and more contribution to the European continent in our reductions of CO2 emissions as well. And that's more from my side. That's more obvious for everybody. That happens Europe with different climate, winters and changing summers as well. What we have here in concerning to the COVID, we have really, as well as everywhere, we have really big troubles for installation of new solar PV. It's a very big barrier for investment, as actually there's only from the 15th of international communication by air started to operate, and actually in total all this stuff makes the situation unpredictable in the future. What we have that the development is really hardly influenced by all of these factors as well.
Talk a little bit about cost, because I think one of the solar success story also has a lot to do with its cost reduction, and we see all these tenders around the world where solar costs less and less. Recently, I think that's also what we highlighted in the global market outlook, that even on 3 continents we reached the $0.01 range per kilowatt hour. That was in Portugal, we had that in Brazil, and we had that also in the UAE recently, and even I think some DFI developing finance institutions backed tenders like scaling solar led to 2-cent range results in Ethiopia, for example. So how much does that help us? Because I think, Jose, you can maybe also take that, because you already touched upon this this point of PPA-based systems, and that we're in trouble now actually in COVID. But okay, let's assume we're overcoming that. In a certain time, in 1 or 2 years. So where are we now? And actually also maybe touch upon this problem, cost competitiveness of solar. In regards to other technologies, what we're seeing now in Holland, the European Commission has always been very much a friend of technology neutral tenders, and we're seeing now in Holland that the SD Plus will be that there will be some competitive factor. So what does it mean for us in Europe, and in what direction should we go? Maybe you take that first, Jose, but everyone can contribute to that, because I think that that really is relevant for all of us.
For us, I think Spain is a very interesting case, because we are the first big European market that really is working in a not subsidy scenario with all the possibilities. Our big contradiction is that we are very competitive, so competitive that when we go to the market, we reduce the market prices, and then the market signal price is reduced. And this is the big contradiction. But the problem is our remark in my first intervention is that market design is not adequate for us. But this is the big contradiction for us. When we speak with the Spanish government and with the different political parties, our main message is not climate, it's economy. Because we have a competitive advantage. not technological competitive advantage. The PV technology is a commodity. Our competitive advantage is the sun and the availability of the land. And then that is how we say we can obtain for our economy the cheaper electricity price that anyone in Europe for the reserve. We can create employment in a direct way from our industry. We are presenting to the government an industrial agenda to promote the industrialization, but to indirect, introducing a cheaper electricity price for our industry. But our main barrier is the market design. It's not, we need oceans. But the problem with the ocean is how the market will works, because how we see in the result of the Portugal ocean, we are very concerned because in Spain we have in this moment 80 gigawatts of project in planning process. And the ocean will be of 3 gigawatts. And then how will be the pressure in the prices? We don't know. This is the contradiction, that we are so competitive that finally this big competitiveness can be against us.
A proposal actually for market design, how you would like to see that solar that the situation could be solved for solar?
Yeah, but we need to redefine the market. We need, it's clear, I think that will be for another discussion, but we need to redefine the market, because one of the contradictions is that maybe the electricity consumer, they will not perceive this reduction of prices of PV if we have a marginalized system. We need to share the market in different parts, and to do that, the competitiveness will be between the technologies more similar ones and the others. But have no sense that maybe we can face one situation and that 90% of the production could be produced with PV or wind at zero cost, and that 10% for fossil fuels, and then the price for the final consumers will be the price of the fossil fuels. That is one of the contradictions of this system. And then it's necessary one reform. And in this reform, we need to implement in competitive conditions, one system in concurrence conditions, one system that allow us to obtain enough price signal to introduce our installations.
Okay, Alex, how's the situation in France? Because of course there's also, when you talk about PPA-based system, the GO discussion actually, or the GOs were an issue in the past. That's why solar, despite its low cost, although the costs are somewhat higher in France than in other countries with similar irradiation in Europe. So can you maybe explain what the discussion is in France and how you want to tackle, or how you are dealing with that?
Yeah, well, we see some PPAs being signed, even recently, last week, a new one has been announced. So it's starting, but much slower. And there is probably also we are entering into a field with new risks, and we see it with the situation now in Spain. Of course, the price, market price, the spot market price can be an issue. We are thinking of the creation of a fund to basically secure the counterpart risk. This is one thing which could help deploying the PPA market. But more generally, indeed, I think although PV is maybe a bit higher still compared to other regions, I think in terms of pure competitiveness, in terms of LCOE comparison, this is not really the issue anymore. And the government strategy has put 30 gigawatts of solar because I think they now understood that this will be the very competitive electricity sources. So on that side, I think the battle is won. The issue is more indeed the value that the producers will be able to get from the market. And I agree, it's the case for a PPA, but it's also actually an issue even under a support scheme mechanism, because you will have to deal with higher support, higher than expected, if the price, the spot market price is going down to 10 or 20 euros. It will be an issue. The annual, to give you an idea, the multi-annual energy program in terms of costs has been designed on a price of 56 euro per megawatt hour by 2030. This is the projection of the market price. So, as I said, there is a lot to think about in terms of market design. A lot has been done, I think, also in the last European package on that. We should work, of course, on the flexibility as well of the market, so to make sure that we are able to capture value in different moments of the day. Interconnection is also, I think, something which could help. Combined with a strong CO2 pricing, I think it could also probably help stabilize a bit the price a bit more. But there is no silver bullet currently, to be honest. And in our country, where there is also a lot of nuclear with also pretty low marginal cost, this might become indeed an issue in the short to in the medium to long term, I would say. We have rather actually observed the opposite over the last 2 years. For instance, we have observed that the cost of support which were forecasted, in reality, they were lower than what was forecasted. So the trend was actually the opposite over the last 2 years, but it's true that with the COVID crisis and the lower prices now, we might end up at the end of this year with a support a bit higher than expected. But really, I think it's really so hard to predict the evolution of the electricity price that currently I wouldn't make a bet, honestly.
So maybe let's touch also on one point. I think Amélie had very nicely in her presentation, I think, but others also had that. I think it's the acceptance. So if we really, we're seeing now a lot of large-scale solar systems. So how can we deal with that? So we've been also asking, as one policy ask, always as a recommendation, to put basically the citizen somewhat in the center, not only for small systems but also for bigger systems. So I found that quite interesting what you are doing in Holland now, that you're having a code of conduct that at least, which is quite a bit actually, 50% of the revenue generation, if I understood, has to stay actually local. I think in Germany there are discussions to keep at least some of that, so that the operator has to have at least its base of operation where the system is installed, so that the FPV is there, so that at least the commercial taxes or so have to flow to this municipality. So what could be a solution? Because we will really look into huge amounts of solar if we want to meet our climate targets, and with solar being so low cost. So what can we do here? So maybe Amélie first, once again, because you are working also on this code of conduct. Holland is anyway always very consensual society. So where are you heading there? And what's the debate? Maybe very briefly.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting questions. Of course, you mentioned the topic earlier, how to maintain a business case with lower electricity and low gas and low CO2 prices. So this is a topic which gives me headaches now in this sector, But the other headache I have is this. So you're very wise in your questions, because you pick out the two aspects in the Netherlands, which really gives me headaches. So, and the headache we have with solar in the Netherlands is really how to answer these questions in our society around, well, we say we have to bring value to the location with a solar PV park. And why? Well, of course, we are a small country. We have high ground prices. And also there is a belief that the Netherlands is really an agricultural land, right? So we have to, with the development of solar parks, it really it feels like people are in pain, right? Because they say, "Oh, our landscape is you know, you ruin our landscape. You have to either we have to forbid solar parks, either we should develop very inclusively, so nature inclusive, landscape inclusive, but also community inclusive." So this is actually a very strong need, a very strong feeling on the Netherlands that people really want to be part of this development of solar parks. So in the climate agreement, there is stated that 50% of the total capacity developed in the Netherlands, ground-mounted, should be 50% locally owned. This means, of course, that every project developer should open their development to the environment and ask people to become partial owner. So what we did in the Netherlands was, and it's not, my members are not always very happy with this, I must admit, but in the Netherlands we choose to, you know, professionalize the cooperative movement and to allow cooperation. There's an echo, very strong echo. I don't know who has the.
Everyone on mute, please. There's some repercussion except Amelie. So when you're not speaking, please mute yourself.
Yeah. So we choose to help all the energy corporations to professionalize themselves in order to be an interesting market party. I don't know if you understand, but it's yeah. Was it?
Yeah.
That's a question.
Yeah. No, I couldn't understand you. Sorry, because the communication was not so good with you.
No, I think so. You have to all mute actually, Jose, on your side when you're not speaking. I think otherwise it won't work. So.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. But maybe you want to address that as well.
Yeah, but in relation with the social asset plan, I'm quite concerned. Still, it's not an issue in Spain. It's an issue only in the Balearic Islands. But I came from the wind sector, and then I see the problems if we to have problems of social assistance. Then we create a specific working group to work in this aspect, and we create a code, a special code for our companies. In the way and the concept of this code is that our plants, when in 20-25 years will finish its life, the natural area will be not in the same condition that was before, if not better. That to work as natural area, as a natural area with the nature must be improved, not well conserved, if not improved.
Yeah.
That we did a consensus with this in relation with this code. We look at the consensus, the 5 biggest ecological groups in Spain to avoid opposition later, and we introduce his ideas, and we consensus with this code that was from the natural barriers to avoid impacting the landscape with trees, to all kind of measures, not to use water, not to use artificial insecticides, or so to introduce nest for a lot of measures. I can fulfill one copy, but to measure of social integration of local people that works, especially in minorities, especially women's, or especially people with discapacitation, disability people, easy for them to find jobs, and then to try to introduce this collective not enough represented in our sector to favorize the integration in our plants. And these kind of measures, and not only we have no CO2 footprint with when we produce electricity, but we have footprint when we produce the panel, we produce the different components, and with the transport. And then we calculate the footprint of every plant and the commitment of the people that the owners of the plant is to plant trees in the way that to cancel this footprint of pollution and transport. And with this kind of measure, we try to be in advance of the position, to have this presentation that we are very polite, very educated. Obviously, we suggest to the people don't do plants in natural areas or with some specific value of archaeological or natural to avoid this kind of problems. It's a big plan to try to avoid these projects. In relation with local participation in the plans is one issue that we have now, because now the regional governments are introducing a specific climate change law, and they are trying to introduce that to do compulsory that all the project, the 20% must be local owned. Our position is to say to them that it's something that we agree in a way voluntary, not compulsory, to avoid speculation, avoid promises. Then, in a voluntary basis, we agree. In a compulsory basis, not. We suggest our companies to do it, but in a voluntary basis, and we are fighting against the government because we consider it's against the free market to do that.
I recognize we have the same debate about these topics. Yeah.
Let's maybe, because we're running out of time, so that everyone, because I think that's one important point. I don't know if this is also something that's giving you a headache, but I think when we talk about solar projects, often permitting is one of the big issues everyone usually has. It doesn't matter if it is for small systems or bigger systems. And of course, the more solar we will see coming or trying to be connected to the grid, the more we will see such issues. So I would be interested for all of you. So what are your solutions, or what are you asking that this topic can be eased and almost solved, so that it will be really, really easy to get systems to the grid? Because I think at the moment the discussion is often in the other direction. Maybe Artem, you want to start first? So as a final conclusion of your contributions.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, really big difficulties here as well for the connection of PV, and even 15% of station have not been connected to the grid to some cases or to some obstacles. But I think that this system should be really simplified, and maybe with the use of some window for the documents, and one person could that needed for this connection to the company that wants to have it. And in other case, this really slow down the growing of the solar industry worldwide and in Europe, of course. So maybe this problem, I could name it as a priority for Ukraine, and also I think, and as far as I understand, that the same is in Europe happens. So to the conclusion, I would like to thank you for such interesting research and for solar market outlook that you have conducted. I know that it took a lot of efforts and sleepless nights for the whole team of solar, all the people involved in this preparation of this outlook and event. And I hope that the reduction of costs in solar will even double the existing installed capacities in Europe in further years, and the solar will become the most important for every system, energy system player, and in cases of not only in the advantages that the but also as it becomes more and more cost competitive.
Alex, maybe to you, because I think permitting has been quite an issue in France, because auctions took place, but we didn't see the installations. So what's your...
Indeed, it's not just the permitting part, it's really a reduction of the full deployment process that we want to get. So first thing is that the crisis demonstrated that we can do many things online. So the first thing that we ask is that all the documents, that everything should be able to be done online, and that you can also then follow as a deployer the process and where your file is in the process within the administration. And there is actually a nice project done by the administration itself on that topic. So I think this is maybe a first thing we can do. The second thing is really to put limits, time limits for the instruction of the permit. That's one thing. But then once you get your permit, you also need to make sure that the instructions of the tenders, the tender results, be it from the national regulator, the report from the national regulator, but also simply the decision and the presentation of the results by the ministry should also be time limited. And we should make sure that we get the results of a tender before the next tender is launched, because in terms of visibility for the players, this is key. And then when you get to the next level, we should also make sure that we have time limits for the projects which are under legal attack, because this is one thing we observe. Jose was rightly mentioning wind.
Please everyone on mute, because there's everyone except Alex on mute.
Yeah. One thing which is delaying projects, it's also once there is a complaint or a legal case which is launched, it can take years sometimes. So also there, we think that we should reduce the timing. We have in other renewable sectors, for instance, reduce the number of levels. You can go in appeal. In France, you have actually 3 levels. You can go twice in appeal. So why we can simply go maybe once in appeal, it's maybe enough. So those are a couple of things which all put together could reduce the time to develop a project. There is a single button on which you can activate and to reduce your time to build. It's really a combination of small things here and there, I think.